All right, today's guest is Emily McGill, who is a spiritual seeker, tarot reader, storytelling strategist, and a deep believer in the power of community. After nearly a decade and a half of working in entertainment in New York City as a Broadway and entertainment publicist and communication consultant, her path of self-exploration led to healing and evolution and reading tarot professionally. So, Emily, thank you very much for coming on. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Drasco. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. And that's a very interesting bio as far as like the jump from like entertainment, who
Yeah.
you could make the argument is very questionable with regards to like how spiritual it might actually be, to like somebody jumping into something totally different. So I'd love for you to break that down for us. Like if you feel the same way, how did you get to doing what you're doing? Just give us the context around that.
Absolutely. I've been a theater kid my whole life. I grew up in dancing school. I found theater when I was 12, as far as like taking classes. I thought I was going to be on stage because I didn't know that there was an entire ecosystem of business that happens off stage, right? Like you really only see the people that are on the stage or on the screen. You don't think about, and then, there's all the people that are in the building. There's your stage crew, your wardrobe team, your hair and makeup team, your stage management team, your ushers, your front of house, your concessions, your porters, right? Like there's all those people too. But then you don't think about the fact that there is advertising, marketing, PR, general management, finance, lawyers, accountants, like there's all this other stuff that takes to make it happen. And I didn't realize that, you just don't think about it necessarily when you're a kid who likes being on stage. So when I moved to New York, I had the dream of working on Broadway. And I knew that it was going to be on that business side of the business, but I had no idea where because I didn't know what my options were. But I interned at a bunch of different places, ended up in a PR office, loved it. Loved the relationships with the cast, the creative team, the producers, seeing the difference that you make. You can, any show that performs on like the Today Show or Good Morning America, or the parades, or even the reviews that are in the paper, right? Like all of that, you have an actual tangible role in. So it was really, really fulfilling to get to see the results of my work. And after bouncing around at a few different offices over the course of my like young part of my career, I ended up at a more traditional PR agency. And I realized I hated the work. I just did not enjoy PR. I enjoyed Broadway. I enjoyed live entertainment. I enjoyed working with talent and helping them share their stories and amplify their voices. But pitching media and just like constant follow-up and like stalking people via email, like that was not enjoyable to me. I was not interested in that. However, when I decided to start my own business, because that was where I had been coming from, that's where I started my business. So I was doing small shows that were doing workshops or concerts or, just like developmental readings, things like that wanted to sort of get some buzz around their projects. And sort of as like that was all happening, my grandmother had passed away in 2014, and that sent me to therapy for the first time in my life. And that was the best thing. That was the best choice I ever made for myself. The best gift I've ever given myself was to work with someone professional. And just, a friend's show likens it that you take someone into the attic of your mind and you're like, there's a Bob Marley record around here somewhere that I want to talk to you about. And they're like, cool. Tell me about that bowling trophy. Right. And so it's this idea that you go for one thing, but then you end up, doing all of this other work. And my therapist is actually the one who had introduced me to the tarot. So sometimes during sessions, if I didn't know what I wanted to do with something or the direction I wanted to go, she would say, why don't you pull a tarot card? And so we would. And we had done that for a couple of years. And I would say it was probably like 2017 or 2018 that I was like, I want a daily practice for myself, something that I do just for me that has nothing to do with, screaming into a void on behalf of someone else, which is what I felt like I was doing all day at my job. And I started pulling a tarot card at my therapist's suggestion. And actually what I started doing was pulling on an app on my phone at first. And after a while, I got, pretty familiar with the cards in the deck and what they meant. I hadn't quite fully grasped the structure just yet, but I had a sort of an idea of the framework. And I started doing more and more sort of exploration of it with myself. And then before the pandemic hit, I was gifted my first hard physical copy of a deck. And that allowed me to then start reading for other people, which I tried to do on my phone a few times, but was not very conducive to an enjoyable experience. Right? It works, but it's not as enjoyable. So I started reading for people. And then of course the pandemic hit. And so everything went online. So I started figuring out how to do readings virtually. And yeah, I've been, sort of in this liminal space for the last 2 years, this sort of limbo tight wire act of like, this is where I'm coming from, this is where I'm going. And so I find myself here talking to you. Okay,
well, such a winding road to bring you to this moment. So
really and truly,
absolutely, and I appreciate the detail, because I think it's interesting of like, like you follow the breadcrumbs, or like that Steve Jobs quote, like it all makes sense when you look backwards, like connect the dots like backwards, but it's probably not something you would have figured you would have done, had you asked yourself like years ago, like, oh, this is probably where I would be now. It's unlikely this is the answer that you would get. So yeah, I think it's cool because it sums up in many ways like so many of our paths, right? Like you don't expect to be where you're at, but then here you are, and in many ways it's better than you had anticipated to be,
absolutely. And I didn't I said that I realized I hated PR, and that's true. But that didn't really hit me, that I was like, I ended up somewhere I didn't mean to be. In January of 2020, I had the best month in my business, and I could not have been more miserable. Could not have been more miserable. I hated what I was doing. I was not happy about the clients that I was attracting. And there were some things that I was starting to do that I was enjoying, but then the pandemic hit and that stuff sort of went away. And even then, that was still like a sort of like communication sort of coaching thing. And like, that is of interest still. But so many people that are in the sort of circles that would have access to that haven't had jobs for 2 years, right? Or they're so busy trying to get their shows up and running and now keep them running that they don't have time for anything else because all they're doing is working. So it's this just really interesting time of like, I don't really know what I want to do. I mean, I know I want to do tarot. I know I love tarot. I'm creating my own Broadway tarot deck. So bringing these things that I love together. So I'm working on that. I'm looking for a publisher and, trying to, like you said, figure out what the next breadcrumb is.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So then I think that's a perfect segue into kind of the main crux of what we explore here, which is, given where you're at in your business right now, right? Like, what's the main challenge that you're experiencing right now?
It's absolutely like, what am I going to do next? Where am I pivoting to? What is the thing that I actually want to spend all of my time and energy doing?
Got it. So,
and the thing you said earlier is the trickiest part, is that it is so winding. There are so many different things that interest me. There are a lot of things that light me up. And I don't want to have to choose.
Right. It's kind of like good problem to have, but still a problem, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. So in that case, if you were to do a reading for a client that had the exact same thing, what would you
Mhm.
do?
I mean, we would probably do a reading that's what would help you, what would hinder you, and what's your untapped potential.
Okay. So if you
That's my
walk
favorite one to
yourself
do
through
that.
that, what would happen?
Well, it would be different depending on what cards got pulled, right? Like that, this situation is always going to be different because of the circumstances of the reading. But I think I would look at what the cards are telling me about where I'm already doing good stuff and I'm going to continue, doing that. The things that are getting in my way, or the things about myself that are getting in my way, right?
Okay.
And then the potential that I haven't even begun to tap into yet.
Okay. So would you be willing to pull a card right now?
Yeah, the tricky part is we have to do the whole thing. You know what I
Okay,
mean?
you
Like
wouldn't be
we
able to
can't just do one. Like if we're
okay,
doing this, it's got to be the whole thing, and that's like a 30-minute reading.
got it.
So I don't know if that works for your podcast timeline.
To be honest, I've never done anything with regards to tarot, so I'm
Yeah.
kind of just throwing it out there. Um, okay,
But
well,
I
okay,
like this idea of giving myself a reading around this question and
yeah, I
treating myself
think
like a
definitely
client.
that's worthwhile considering.
Yeah,
And you can let me know if this makes sense to you.
great.
So, because let's just say the theme here is like, how am I contributing to the problems in front of me, right? Like kind of like the
Mm-hmm.
vehicle in this instance is the business. If I think one of the cards you said you would pull is like, how am I contributing to, like, it was kind of like a similar theme of it. So if you were to pull one card, like, would that work for you for just that
Yeah,
one
we could
central theme
pull
or not?
what would hinder me card. Yeah. But I would like to now do a full reading like this
That's fair. So you
for
might do that
myself.
one off air.
I'm
I
gonna do
think,
that off air
yeah,
totally because I'm
yeah,
gonna need hella more time for that.
yeah.
But
Let's
yeah, we
just
can
say for the sake of this,
absolutely.
let's just roll with it because I've never actually done anything like this either. So let's just see let's just
Cool.
see where it goes.
I love it. Yeah, so I'm gonna pull a card about what's standing in my way, what's hindering me. And what I was saying to you is that it really, like, this is what's hindering you, or me rather, or whoever's receiving the reading, but it could also be the thing in yourself, right? So I want to say that I like to say that tarot is a visual or a physical representation of information you hold within yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's something that you know in your heart or in your gut, but it hasn't made it up to your head yet. And so you don't necessarily have the language for it. You don't necessarily have, the ability to express it yet, but it's there. This information exists. And so this is a way, it's like texting yourself a meme, right? It's like, it's like, this is what I'm trying to say, right? Just in a visual form. So that, that could be helpful context for anyone who's not familiar with the tarot, because there's a lot of stigma around it. And it's just a deck of cards. They never lie, but it's just a deck of cards.
Love it.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to pull a card, and this is what's going to hinder me. And so this here is the 10 of Wands. And there are two parts of the tarot deck, the major arcana and the minor arcana. The major arcana are like our magic cards. So when they show up, we pay special attention. The minor arcana is like a traditional deck of playing cards. So you have 4 suits, and then you have ace through 10 and 4 court cards instead of 3. So king and a queen, a knight and a page. But your 4 suits also correspond to your 4 elements. And so our wands is our fire. That's our passion, our drive, our creativity, stuff that lights us up. It gets us out of bed in the morning. And the 10 is all about like carrying a burden, carrying a load, the struggle, like the dedication to the struggle. And
Perfect.
so that's what this is telling me. This is saying to me that like things don't have to be hard. I'm choosing to make them hard. And growing up, I come from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is sometimes described as a drinking town with a football problem. It was a very industrial city for a very long time. There have been a lot of the steel mills, and just like it's like a really big blue collar town. But there's also this steeped dedication to the struggle. Like it's like in the water, in the ground. Like it's just like everything's going to be hard. Life is hard. It's always hard. And there's no sort of sense of anything ever being easy, of having ease available to you.
Got it. So how does that relate to what you're going through right now?
I think it's like really old programming that I just think everything has to be really hard. Like it's never going to be easy. It's never going to come easily. The right clients and the right people and the right ideas aren't going to come quickly. And, it's always going to be difficult to make it happen.
Okay. So
and that's false. It's all
absolutely. It can be a choice, 110%.
Uh-huh.
So the original question we kind of started this whole thing is essentially like, what am I pivoting to next?
Yeah.
Okay. And what's coming up is like, okay, well, it's got to be hard. So what I'm curious then is, what do you intuit the connection between things have to be hard and difficult and getting clarity on the next step? Because they don't necessarily have to coincide with each other. So I'm just curious what for you connects.
Well, I think what it's saying is like, stop struggling and trying to make a decision and just like get quiet. Right? Like drop all the matches and see which one lights the fire. Like
Okay.
so you don't have to carry all of these logs with you everywhere.
So it's the hardness of the decision, not necessarily the hardness of the result.
Yes.
Okay.
It's like, no matter what you choose, it doesn't have to be hard. And also you don't have to sit here and like make a choice right now. Just get quiet and listen. And it will show itself to you.
Perfect. So are you okay if we take that a bit further?
Absolutely. Let's go.
Okay. So if you lost the ability to think the thought that the decision had to be hard, who or what would you be?
I would be a tarot reader that, has a Sirius XM show where she reads people's tarot cards and has her own Broadway tarot deck and helps people tap into that stuff within themselves that they can't quite get to. Because that's the part that lights me up the most.
The last part?
When you see the aha moment that someone has, that realization, and things shift for them and see that perspective shift in the moment, like it's so magical to see that.
So can you recognize that in yourself?
I think I'm having a hard time seeing it.
What did you do just 5 minutes ago?
You mean just pulling a tarot card for myself, like you said?
And the realization that
aha, yes, of course. Yeah, right. I can watch this back later and see that experience for myself, of myself, with myself.
Correct. So I think the more important question then is, why do you think you overlooked it? And why do you think it was even so hard for you to realize what I was asking?
Because it's not fun to look at the parts of ourselves that we're not a fan of. Right? It's not fun to look at those shadows, those parts of ourselves that we're like, I don't like the way you do that. And yet you do it and I don't change it.
Right. It's more fun to do it in other people because then you can kind of vicariously live that way.
Right. The mirror.
Correct. But then is it in full integrity with the transformation that you want to instill in others?
It never is.
It never is, right? So then the question then becomes, being aware of that, knowing all of that, knowing that it's not in integrity and knowing that you want to be in integrity, what's the fear of being in integrity?
Oh, that is not seen as being in, as actually having integrity. That it's not received as it's intended. Not that it's not received as it's intended, because nothing's ever received as it's intended, no matter how clear we try and make our intentions and our expectations. Something's always gonna gonna have that glitch in the matrix. But I think that there's a fear, right? It's always the fear. It's always the fear.
So then it really comes down to, is the fear of looking at your own shadow, looking at your own programming, greater than what is trying to emerge through your next step?
Right. Can you overcome your fear with courage to step into your light?
I mean, overcome is one way to look at it, but it's just like, what's greater? Because in this moment right now, the fear was actually greater, right? Like you didn't even allow yourself to acknowledge that the joy you saw in others for them seeing and making an aha moment and a shift through your work. You had a hard time acknowledging that in yourself. You had a hard time acknowledging that it could be easy. It's like everything that I want for my clients, I have a hard time acknowledging for myself.
Which is this 10 of Wands all over again, right?
Correct.
The hardness, the difficulty, the struggle.
Right, because I rather struggle and witness the joy and the ease in others, but I'll just keep carrying all of my baggage and bullshit.
Yep.
Because that's not to say the more fun way, it's more comfortable.
Well, no, I was gonna say, exactly. That it's the familiar and comfortable way, because it's the way that it was always done before me, and that I was programmed to do things.
Correct.
And now that reprogramming process, I mean, it's lifelong, right? That reprogramming process doesn't ever end.
Yep.
But yeah, there's something really major, because you said it, like there is that fear that the integrity, well, as I kind of started to say, like, isn't seen as being integrity, right? That it's seen as being less than trustworthy or less than honest, where it shouldn't actually matter, because I know that it is trustworthy, that it is honest, that it is authentic, that it is coming from the core.
Yep, I would agree. And I think just going to make it perfectly clear, it's not necessarily that I'm not in integrity if I'm unwilling to like look at my shadow in that moment while looking at somebody else's. I think you can fully be in integrity for holding the space for the other. I think it more comes down to that integrity in this instance is the bottleneck to you moving forward, right? Because you can only expand to the degree that you're allowing yourself to expand. That will be reflected in your business, right? It's like, if I don't want to look at my shadow, that also means I have to keep making things hard, because that's a default that's coming up. So therefore, I'm going to continue to create evidence that it is actually hard. That is the bottleneck, but that is actually the surface level solution to the real problem, which is the fear of looking inward, staying in integrity with my process, the same process that I provide to others, healing that, transcending through that, and allowing what wants to emerge. That is the process, not just for the clarity of the next decision, but more than likely the expansion of your business as well. So what lands for you when I reflect that back?
A big part of what landed was a reminder to treat myself the way I treat my clients. That's something I've been trying to remind myself since I first started my business, when it was more on the PR side, and it was, about getting the word out to the media. I was trying to treat myself and some of my other creative projects as though I was a client, and it was like, okay, well, we're going to get this, think about the story angles, think about the pitches, right? Think about who we could send them to. and like really use that process. So I think this is another invitation to step back and treat myself as though I'm a client and say, take myself through the process. What does this look like? What does this feel like? Because that's the only way also to really understand how anyone that I'm working with, who ultimately, I really just, like I said, want to help recognize this also within themselves, but how I can do it and be the living proof, right? It's like the best testimonial you can have is yourself.
Yeah. Walking your own talk. 100%.
Right. And, you know, just living that truth actively. I'm really going to have to listen back to this because I don't think much of this is instilling itself in me, like crystallizing within me the way I want it to. So I'm really looking forward to listening back to this conversation.
Yeah, I think because you're hitting that edge of the resistance, I think that's why you're having a hard time consciously taking it in, because there's a part of you that wants to resist this.
Oh, totally. Full body resistance.
Yeah. 100%. So
yeah,
in that instance, again, because we can't solve all of the problems in just one, podcast episode, for the sake of this container, like, does that feel complete for you, or is there still something left?
Absolutely. No, that's a beautiful realization of opportunity and challenge.
Beautiful. So in that case, if you can just sum up in your words, how are you when you came into this conversation, and then what are the highlights and realization you've had as you leave?
Yeah, I didn't really know what exactly to expect coming in. I think anytime I feel full body resistance, I know it's something I probably should do. And I'm working very hard on personal preference not having as large of a role in how I live my life. So, it's whether or not I like it. Like, if it seems like it's a hard yes, then like, let's do it. Or a hard no, like, you got to walk away. But sometimes when I have that experience of seeing that something is going to press up against some parts that don't feel so great, I will just wrap myself in bubble wrap. And so this was a nice reminder to, like, take the gloves off, take the wrapping off, and like, face it with your bare hands. Like, there's no bubble wrap here.
It's a full contact sport. That is true. Well, beautifully said. So in that case, if you can just close us off and let everybody know, where to find you, who's the best person to find you, floor is yours for that.
Absolutely. My Instagram is Emily Ann, ANNEMCG, Emily Ann, ANNEMCG. And my website is emilymcgillentertainment.com. I am mostly out here trying to demystify the tarot and help people, like I said, tell their stories and amplify their voices and get to the core of what it is that they're not saying to themselves.
Beautiful. Love it. Well, we'll include all of that in the show notes. And Emily, thank you very much for coming on. Thank you for being the first one to draw a card on the show. That hasn't happened before. So you get the number one slot for that. And to everybody else listening, we'll see you on the next one.